Most people think of history as something that happened. Battles won, empires lost, dates memorized, then forgotten. But some events don't end when the history books say they do. Some decisions, made in rooms most people have never heard of, by men most people couldn't name, are still operating right now, today. In the borders you can't cross, the wars that never fully stop, the financial systems you can't escape, and the crises you see on the news every morning that you can't quite explain. This is a list of 10 of those events, not the most famous moments in history, not necessarily the most dramatic, the ones that are still running. The Peace of Westphalia, 1648. In 1648, after 30 years of the most devastating war Europe had ever seen, diplomats gathered in two German cities and did something that had never been done before. They agreed that every state would be sovereign within its own borders. No outside power, not the Pope, not the Emperor, could intervene in another country's internal affairs. This was not just a peace agreement. It was the blueprint for the modern world. Every United Nations resolution, every diplomatic standoff over interference in internal affairs, every time a government says this is our sovereign right, that is Westphalia speaking. It is also why the world struggles to stop genocide, ethnic cleansing, and authoritarian repression. The same rule that protects small nations from domination also protects dictators from accountability. Every border on Earth is downstream of a conversation that happened in 1648. The Opium Wars, 1839-1860. In 1839, the British Empire forced China to accept opium imports at gunpoint. When China resisted, Britain went to war. China lost both times, ceding Hong Kong, opening its ports, and accepting terms so humiliating that the Chinese government called this period the Century of Humiliation. That phrase is not historical. It is the current foreign policy. Every major decision China makes today, the Belt and Road Initiative, the military buildup in the South China Sea, the refusal to accept Western criticism of its internal governance, the drive for technological self-sufficiency, runs through the memory of those wars. Xi Jinping has explicitly cited the Century of Humiliation as the context for China's rise. The Opium Wars didn't end in 1860. They are still being answered. The Berlin Conference, 1884-85. In 1884, 14 European powers sat in a room in Berlin and divided Africa between themselves. No African was present. No African was consulted. Lines were drawn through kingdoms, across ethnic territories, splitting languages, families, and trade routes with geometric precision. Those borders are still the borders of Africa today. And those borders, artificial, arbitrary, designed to serve European interests, are still producing the conflicts, the ethnic tensions, and the political instability that define the continent in the 21st century. Every civil war, every failed state, every refugee crisis. It doesn't start in 1884, but 1884 is where you have to begin. The Balfour Declaration, 1917. On November 2nd, 1917, British Foreign Secretary Arthur Balfour sent a letter to the leader of the British Jewish community. It was 67 words long. Those 67 words promised a Jewish national home in Palestine, a territory Britain didn't own, populated by people who weren't consulted, while also promising to protect the rights of the existing Arab population. Those two promises were incompatible from the moment they were written. Everything that has happened in Israel and Palestine since the 1948 war, the occupation, the siege of Gaza, the endless failed peace processes, is in some fundamental sense the consequence of a contradiction built into 67 words in 1917. The document is in a British archive. The consequences are on the news every single day. The Bretton Woods Conference, 1944. In July 1944, with World War II not yet over, 730 delegates from 44 nations gathered at a hotel in New Hampshire. and designed the post-war global financial system. They created the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and they anchored the entire global economy to the US dollar. Every country on Earth that holds dollar reserves, and almost every country does, is still operating inside the architecture built at Bretton Woods. When developing nations take IMF loans with conditions attached, that's Bretton Woods. When the United States uses dollar access as a foreign policy weapon through sanctions, that's Bretton Woods. When global oil is priced in dollars, or when countries start questioning whether it should be, that is Bretton Woods. The conference lasted 3 weeks. The system it built has lasted 80 years, and its cracks are just now beginning to show. The Partition of India, 1947. In August 1947, British India was divided into two nations in one of the most hastily executed acts of imperial withdrawal in history. The man who drew the border, Cyril Radcliffe, had never been to India before. He completed the boundary in 5 weeks. In the months that followed, somewhere between 200,000 and 2 million people were killed. 15 million were displaced. Today, India and Pakistan are two nuclear-armed states with no formal peace treaty, an unresolved dispute over Kashmir, and a history of 4 wars. The border Radcliffe drew in 5 weeks has held the potential for nuclear conflict for 78 years. A hasty line on a map, still unresolved. Both sides are still armed with the weapons to prove it. Operation Ajax, the 1953 Iran coup. In 1953, the CIA and British intelligence orchestrated the overthrow of Iran's democratically elected Prime Minister, Mohammad Mossadegh. His crime? Nationalizing Iran's oil industry. The coup reinstalled the Shah, a US-backed autocrat whose brutality generated the fury that produced the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The hostage crisis, the Iran-Iraq War, decades of sanctions, the nuclear standoff. The Strait of Hormuz is a permanent global flashpoint. All of it flows from a single covert operation ordered because a democratic government tried to control its own oil. The CIA has since declassified the documents. The consequences have never been declassified. They are still happening. The Iranian Revolution, 1979. When Ayatollah Khomeini returned to Tehran in February 1979, he didn't just change Iran, he changed the entire architecture of the Middle East. The Islamic Revolution created the first modern theocratic state, explicitly Shia, explicitly anti-Western. Every existing power in the region had to respond. Saudi Arabia, Sunni, monarchical, deeply threatened, began funding Wahhabist movements across the Muslim world as a counter-ideology. The result is the ideological infrastructure that produced Al-Qaeda and later ISIS. The Iran-Iraq War, the rise of Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthi movement in Yemen, the proxy conflicts across Syria, Iraq, and the Gulf. Every single one traces directly to the fault line that the 1979 revolution opened between Shia Iran and Sunni Arab states. The revolution is 46 years old. Its proxy wars are still being fought this week. The collapse of the Soviet Union, 1991. On December 25, 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev resigned. The Soviet flag came down over the Kremlin. The largest country on Earth dissolved overnight. What followed was not the stable, democratic transition that Western leaders promised. It was economic devastation, the looting of state assets by oligarchs, the collapse of social infrastructure for hundreds of millions of people, and a deep, humiliated fury, particularly in the Russian security establishment, at what NATO's eastward expansion looked like from Moscow. The war in Ukraine, the frozen conflicts across the former Soviet space, the nuclear standoff that defines European security today. They are all downstream of decisions and broken promises made in the months after a flag came down in Moscow. 1991 did not end the Cold War. It just changed its shape. The National Security Act and the creation of the CIA, 1947. In 1947, the United States National Security Act created three institutions that would permanently reshape the world: the Department of Defense, the National Security Council, and the Central Intelligence Agency. For the first time in American history, the country had a permanent intelligence apparatus with an explicit mandate to conduct covert operations abroad in peacetime. What followed? The overthrow of governments in Iran, Guatemala, Chile, and the Congo, the funding of mujahideen in Afghanistan that created the Taliban, the training of foreign militaries that produced authoritarian regimes across Latin America and Asia, the extraordinary rendition programs of the post-9/11 era. None of this was accidental. All of it was policy. And it permanently defined how the world's most powerful country projects influence, not through declared war, but through the quiet manipulation of other nations' political systems. The architecture built in 1947 is still operating. The operations it enables are still classified. The consequences are not. 10 decisions, 10 moments where history didn't just happen, where choices were made that locked the future into a particular shape. The sovereignty of nations, the humiliation of empires, the borders of a continent, the architecture of global finance, the fracture lines of the Middle East, the ghost of the Cold War, the machinery of covert power. These are not past events. They are the operating system of the world you live in right now. Every headline has a past. Every crisis has a structure behind it. If understanding that structure matters to you, subscribe to Epoch Insight and hit the notification bell. And let us know in the comments, which of these 10 do you think the world still hasn't fully reckoned with? We read every single one.